On a wall inside a tomb in Middle Egypt, there is a painting that solves one of the oldest mysteries on Earth. And for almost 200 years, nobody believed it. The painting shows a colossal stone statue, 58 tons of solid alabaster, being dragged across the desert on a wooden sledge by 172 men. That part scholars accepted. But standing on the front of the sledge, right at the leading edge, there is one more figure. A single man leaning forward, pouring water onto the sand directly in front of the runners. For nearly 2 centuries, Egyptologists dismissed him. They called it a ritual, a ceremonial purification of the path, a symbolic offering. Then, in 2014, a team of physicists in Amsterdam built a laboratory model of that exact scene: sledge, sand, weight, water, and discovered the man pouring water is not performing a ritual. He is performing engineering. Pour the right amount of water onto desert sand, and the friction under a loaded sledge drops by half. The sand stops piling up in front of the runners. The load glides. The painting was never a religious scene. It was an instruction manual, painted on a wall, in plain sight, and we walked past it for 200 years. And that painting is only the beginning, because in the last decade, 3 more discoveries have surfaced, and together they do something no theory has ever done. They let the pyramid builders speak for themselves. A ramp carved into a cliff face with a lifting system nobody thought Egypt had. A vanished branch of the Nile found buried under the desert that flowed directly to the foot of the Giza Plateau. And the biggest one of all, a stack of papyrus pages, the oldest written documents ever found anywhere on Earth, written by a man who personally helped build the Great Pyramid, describing his work week by week in his own hand. Not a myth, not a metaphor, a logbook. By the end of this, you will know how the pyramids were really built, according to the only witnesses who were actually there. And you will also see the one part of the story the evidence still cannot explain, the part that is still sealed inside the pyramid right now. Let's start with the painting, because it is the most visual clue we have, and because its story almost ended in destruction. The tomb belongs to a man named Jehuti-Hotep, a regional governor who lived around 1900 BCE, and it sits in the cliffs of Deir el-Bersha, on the east bank of the Nile in Middle Egypt. When it was first documented by European travelers in the 1800s, the transport scene stunned them. Rows of haulers on ropes, overseers clapping time, water carriers marching alongside with jars, and that one man at the front of the sledge pouring. The scale is written right there in hieroglyphs beside the image. The statue is described as 13 cubits high, roughly 6.8 meters, cut from the alabaster quarries at Hatnub. Remember that name, Hatnub. It comes back later, and when it does, it changes everything. Here is what makes the water pourer so important. For generations, the mainstream picture of pyramid construction had a physics problem buried inside it. Dry sand is one of the worst surfaces on Earth for dragging heavy loads. The runners of a sledge dig in, sand piles into a wedge in front of them, and the force required climbs until the whole effort stalls. Skeptics used this constantly. They ran the numbers on dragging multi-ton blocks across dry desert and concluded the workforce required was absurd. And that conclusion left a vacuum. And into that vacuum poured every alternative theory you have ever heard. Lost technology, levitation, outside help. The blocks were too heavy. The friction was too high. The Egyptians could not have done it. That was the argument. Then came the 2014 study. Physicist Daniel Bohn and his team at the University of Amsterdam took the tomb painting seriously as a technical document. They built scaled sledges in the lab, loaded them with weights, and measured the exact force needed to drag them across sand at different levels of moisture, running the experiment again and again, from bone dry to waterlogged, recording every value. Published in Physical Review Letters, one of the most rigorous physics journals in the world, their result was blunt. Add water to desert sand in the right proportion, and microscopic bridges of moisture bind the grains together. The sand stiffens. It stops flowing, stops wedging, and behaves almost like a solid track. The pulling force required drops by as much as 50%. Too little water, and it fails. Too much water, and it fails. There is a precise window, and the man on the sledge, with his jar tipped forward at the leading edge, is maintaining exactly that window. Half the friction means half the men. A load that needed 200 haulers on dry sand needs 100 on properly wetted sand. And the wedge of sand that stalls the sledge simply never forms. The impossible workforce problem, the foundation stone of a century of alternative theories, collapses, cut down by a single painted figure that scholars had filed under religion. They weren't guessing, they were recording. And that raises an uncomfortable question. If the Egyptians documented one of their engineering techniques on a tomb wall, and we misread it as ritual for 2 centuries, what else did they document that we misread? Hold that question, because the answer is carved into a cliff 200 kilometers south of Giza, at the very quarry named in Jehutihotep's tomb. But first, you need to know what almost happened to the painting, because this evidence is not safe. In the years after 2011, during a period of chaos and looting at Egyptian heritage sites, vandals broke into the tomb of Jehutihotep and attacked the walls with blades and chisels, carving out chunks to sell on the black market. The transport scene, the single most important image of ancient heavy engineering ever found, was hacked and gouged. Sections of it are gone forever. The evidence survived 200 years of scholarly dismissal. And then, just as science finally proved what it was showing us, someone took a blade to it. We are reading this record at the last possible moment. Now to Hatnub, the alabaster quarries where Jehutihotep's colossus was cut. In 2018, a joint French and British team, led by Yannis Gordon of the French Institute in Cairo and Roland Enmarch of the University of Liverpool, was documenting inscriptions at Hatnub when they uncovered something no one expected to find: a ramp. Not a gentle earthen slope of the kind drawn in textbooks. A steep ramp, cut from the living rock, climbing out of the quarry pit at a gradient of 20% or more, an angle every conventional model said was impossible for hauling stone. And flanking that ramp on both sides, 2 staircases, and drilled along those staircases, rows of deep post holes, sockets for thick wooden posts that are no longer there. Here is why that layout matters. A steep ramp with posts on either side is not just a ramp, it is a machine. Picture the block sitting on its sledge at the bottom of the slope, ropes lashed across it. Teams below the load pull it upward. Ropes from the sledge run up and around the wooden posts and back down to teams standing above, pulling downhill, using their own body weight, with the posts acting as anchoring points that redirect the force. Egyptologists described it as a system that let the builders haul massive blocks up slopes far steeper than anyone believed possible, effectively multiplying the pulling force and cutting the ramp length needed to reach height. And the dating is the detail that turns this from interesting to historic. The inscriptions surrounding the ramp include the name of a king, Khufu, the pharaoh of the Great Pyramid. This lifting system was in use at an active royal quarry during the exact reign in which the Great Pyramid was rising at Giza. For decades, the honest answer to how do you get blocks up a pyramid was we don't really know. The ramp models never quite worked. Too long, too much material, too shallow. Hatnub is the first hard evidence that the builders had solved the steepness problem, and they solved it with rope, wood, gravity, and geometry. And while we are correcting the record, one more myth has to die here, because the ground at Giza already killed it: the slaves. The image of whipped masses hauling stone comes from Hollywood, not from Egypt. Since the 1990s, excavations led by archaeologist Mark Lehner, south of the pyramids, have uncovered an entire purpose-built workers' city. Dormitories laid out in long galleries, administrative buildings, and industrial bakeries capable of producing bread by the thousands of loaves. The trash heaps tell the real story. Enormous quantities of cattle, sheep, and goat bone, prime cuts, young animals, the most expensive protein in Egypt, fed to the workforce daily. And in the workers' cemetery, on the ridge above, skeletons show healed fractures that were set and splinted, even successfully amputated limbs, evidence of organized medical care. You do not feed slaves prime beef and give them surgeons. This was a rotating national labor force, skilled crews serving tours of duty for the state, housed, fed, treated, and, as the graffiti shows, proud enough of the work to sign it. The pyramid was not built by broken people. It was built by an organized country, and that is a far more formidable fact. So the hieroglyphs and the archaeology have now given us two pieces: how you move impossible weight across sand, how you pull impossible weight up a slope. But both of those are technique. Neither one explains the true miracle of Giza, which was never the individual block. It was the system. 2.3 million blocks, quarried, shipped, delivered, and placed on schedule for over 2 decades without the entire project collapsing into chaos. To explain that, you would need something absurd. You would need paperwork. You would need someone who was actually there to have written it all down, and for that writing to survive 4,500 years. Here's where it gets strange. Because in 2013, at a forgotten harbor on the Red Sea coast, that is exactly what came out of the ground. The site is called Wadi al-Jarf, and until recently, it wasn't on anyone's map of important places. A French team, led by Egyptologist Pierre Tallet, was excavating what turned out to be the oldest artificial harbor ever discovered, a 4th dynasty port complex with storage galleries carved into the rock. The harbor itself was a revelation, an L-shaped stone jetty running out into the Red Sea, dozens of massive limestone anchors still lying on the seabed, and 30 rock-cut galleries in the hills behind it, where disassembled boats were stored between expeditions, each gallery sealed shut with enormous blocks stamped with the name of the reigning king, Khufu. Then, in March 2013, at the entrance to one of those sealed galleries, Tallet's team found hundreds of fragments of inscribed papyrus, buried exactly where a work crew had discarded or stored them 45 centuries ago. When the dust settled and the fragments were pieced together, the team realized they were holding the oldest inscribed papyri ever found anywhere on Earth. And the best preserved of them was not a prayer, not a spell, not a king's boast. It was a logbook, a daily work journal kept by a middle manager named Merer, an inspector in charge of a team of roughly 40 men. The dates on the document place it in the 27th year of the reign of Khufu, near the very end of the Great Pyramid's construction. Merer was not writing about the pyramid. Merer was building it. Read what his logbook actually records, and the mythology falls away, replaced by something far more astonishing. The document is laid out like a modern timesheet, a grid of days written in neat columns, the dates in red ink, the activities in black, entry after entry in the confident hand of a professional scribe who filled out this form so many times he could do it half asleep. Day after day, Merer documents the same relentless cycle. His crew sails to the limestone quarries at Tura, on the east bank of the Nile, the source of the fine white casing stones that once made the Great Pyramid gleam. They load the blocks onto boats. They sail the cargo across and deliver it to a place Merer names in his own handwriting, Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu. That is the ancient name of the Great Pyramid. 2 to 3 round trips every 10-day Egyptian week. Loading, sailing, unloading, returning. In other entries, his crew is dispatched to move stone for a project at Heliopolis, or rotated through duties at an administrative center run by the state, a workforce being scheduled and redeployed across a national construction program like assets on a spreadsheet. The logbook even names the official mirror's operation reported to, Ankhof half-brother of Khufu himself, described with the title chief for all the works of the king. The man running the Great Pyramid project has a name, a face. We even have his painted bust sitting in a museum in Boston. And now, for the first time, we have the internal paperwork of his logistics network. This is not interpretation. This is not a theory built on inference. It is a primary source written by a participant, naming the pyramid, naming the quarry, naming the boss, and describing the supply chain in motion. For decades, people have said no records of the pyramid's construction exist, and treated that silence as evidence of a cover-up or a lost civilization. The records existed. They were sealed in a desert cave by the Red Sea, waiting. And here is the detail that closes the loop completely. There are hieroglyphs inside the Great Pyramid itself, not carved for display, hidden. In 1837, workers forcing their way into the cramped relieving chambers above the king's chamber, spaces sealed since construction, never meant to be seen by any human being again, found the walls marked with red ochre graffiti, painted by the work gangs themselves, on blocks that were then buried under thousands of tons of masonry. The marks include crew names, and the crews named themselves after their king. One gang wrote its title where only the stone would ever read it, the Friends of Khufu. Another chamber carries the name of a gang loyal to the same pharaoh. These are the same style of team designations that appear in Mirror's logbook. The same organizational language, files and gangs and divisions, a workforce structured like a navy. Skeptics have spent nearly 2 centuries arguing those marks were forged by their discoverer. But the graffiti runs into joints and behind blocks where no one could reach after construction, in places physically impossible to paint once the chamber was sealed. The men who set those stones signed them. The pyramid is not an anonymous monument dropped into history by unknown hands. It is a signed piece of work, and the signatures match the paperwork. If you want to see documents like this decoded every week, records that rewrite what we think we know, hit subscribe, because this investigation is about to go underwater, literally. And the next clue was hiding beneath the sand of Giza itself. Because Mirror's logbook creates a problem, a beautiful problem. He describes sailing stone barges, essentially, to the pyramid. But stand at Giza today, and the Nile is about 7 kilometers away, across open desert. You cannot sail a 15-ton block of limestone across sand. Either Mirror was exaggerating, or the map of ancient Egypt is wrong. In 2022, a team of geographers and geologists decided to test it. Led by Haider Shesha, they drilled deep sediment cores from the floodplain east of the pyramids and analyzed the buried layers, tens of thousands of pollen grains, layer by layer, reading the ancient environment like tree rings. The study, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, found the signature of standing and flowing water, marsh plants, riverside vegetation, exactly where the desert is now. A lost branch of the Nile, now called the Khufu branch, once flowed along the edge of the Giza Plateau. And during the 4th dynasty, precisely when the pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure were rising, that branch was running high, deep enough for heavy cargo vessels. The builders didn't drag their stone across 7 kilometers of desert. They built harbors, and the river delivered the blocks nearly to the base of the construction site. Archaeologists had already found traces of basins and quay walls buried east of the plateau, structures that made no sense next to a waterless desert. Now they make perfect sense. They were port facilities. Giza was not a monument in the wilderness. It was a waterfront industrial complex with docks, storage, worker housing, bakeries and breweries feeding thousands of men, and a shipping lane running straight past the front gate. Centuries later, the branch silted up and vanished under the sand, taking the entire logic of the operation with it, which is part of why the pyramids looked so impossible to everyone who came after. The highway was gone. Mirror's logbook and the sediment cores locked together like two halves of a torn photograph. The papyrus says boats, the ground says water. 4,500 years apart, they agree. So look at what the evidence has assembled. A wall painting that encodes friction physics. A quarry ramp that encodes mechanical advantage. A logbook that encodes the supply chain. A buried river that encodes the delivery route. The hieroglyphs and the ground keep telling the same story. And it is a story about a civilization that understood materials, forces, and logistics at a level we never gave them credit for. But that explanation has a problem. Or rather, it has a hole in the shape of the pyramid's upper third. And this is where the story stops being comfortable. External ramps, even clever ones, run into brutal geometry as a pyramid rises. To reach the top at a hollowable gradient, a straight ramp would need to be well over a kilometer long and contain a significant fraction of the pyramid's own volume in material. No trace of such a monster has ever been found at Giza. The Hatnub system helps. Steeper angles mean shorter ramps. But the highest courses of the Great Pyramid remain genuinely unexplained, and the blocks up there are not small. The granite beams roofing the king's chamber and its relieving chambers weigh 25 to 80 tons each, and they sit more than 60 meters above the ground. In 1986, a French team ran a microgravimetry survey of the Great Pyramid, measuring tiny variations in the density of the masonry, and found something odd. A spiral-shaped anomaly of lower density winding through the body of the monument. 2 decades later, French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin proposed what it might be. An internal ramp, a corridor climbing inside the pyramid's outer edge, used to haul blocks up from within, then left in place, sealed inside the finished structure. The theory is elegant, it matches the anomaly, and it even matches a strange feature visible on the pyramid today. A notch near the northeast edge, about 2/3 of the way up, where a small open chamber sits at exactly the point Houdin's model predicts the internal ramp would turn a corner. And the theory makes a testable prediction. There should be an open corridor still spiraling through the pyramid right now. Houdin and his supporters have spent years requesting permission for the non-invasive surveys, thermal imaging, muon scans targeted on the corners that could confirm or kill the theory. The permits have not come. The one scan that did go forward, the Scan Pyramids Muon project, found something else entirely. In 2017, published in the journal Nature, 3 independent teams confirmed a massive void inside the Great Pyramid, at least 30 meters long, sitting above the Grand Gallery, sealed since construction. Never entered, never explained, the response from Egypt's antiquities establishment was to publicly downplay the announcement and criticize the team for publishing it all. In 2023, a second hidden corridor was confirmed behind the north face and even filmed empty and pristine. The big void, the one the size of an airliner cabin, remains exactly as it was. No camera, no probe. The pattern is familiar. Every time an instrument reaches deeper into this structure, it finds something that should not be there. And then the investigation slows to a stop. Now, let's slow down and be honest with each other. Does any of this mean the pyramids hide lost technology or impossible knowledge? Probably not. And you should be suspicious of anyone who tells you it does. The grounded reading of the evidence is actually the astonishing one. The void above the Grand Gallery may be a construction feature, a relieving space, or even the fossil of an internal ramp junction, a leftover of the building process itself, rather than a treasure chamber. The permit delays may be bureaucracy and politics rather than concealment, because in Egypt, archaeology has always been tangled with both. The upper third problem may simply mean the builders combined methods, external ramps low, internal ramps or levering systems high, in ways that left little trace. None of the last decade's discoveries require mystery to matter. A tomb painting that doubles as a physics diagram, a quarry that doubles as a machine, a logbook that doubles as a supply chain database, a river summoned into service and then lost. Strip away every speculative layer, and what remains is still a Bronze Age society running one of the most sophisticated industrial operations in human history and writing it down. And that is the real revelation hiding in the title of this video. The engineering secret of ancient Egypt was never a single trick. It was documentation. The Egyptians recorded their methods on tomb walls, on quarry cliffs, on papyrus, and the record survived. Our mistake was the lens. For 200 years, we looked at hieroglyphs and saw religion, symbolism, decoration. A man pouring water became a priest. A work gang's graffiti became a prayer. A logistics report stayed buried because nobody imagined it could exist. Every time we finally read the record as engineering, it turned out to be accurate. The friction numbers check out in a physics lab. The ramp exists in the rock. The river is in the sediment. The boats are in the logbook. They weren't primitive mystics decorating a tomb. They were engineers leaving notes. And if that's true, it means our history is missing a chapter, not a chapter about who built the pyramids. We now know exactly who. Men like Merer, teams with names and pay records and schedules, but a chapter about how much of the ancient world's so-called mythology is actually its technical literature. Still sitting in plain sight, still misfiled under religion, waiting for someone to read it the way it was written. Which leaves one final question, and it is not a small one. If the builders documented everything else, the hauling, the shipping, the quarrying, the crews, then somewhere the master record of the Great Pyramid itself once existed. Plans, course counts, the method for the top. Merer's logbook proves such documents were kept. The galleries at Wadi al-Jarf were only partially preserved, and Talat's team believes more papyri once filled them. So where is the rest of the archive? Destroyed? Still buried in a sealed gallery on some forgotten coast? Or, as some researchers quietly wonder, deposited where the Egyptians deposited everything that mattered, inside the monument it describes, in a space no one has ever opened. Tonight, the tomb of Hotep sits dark in the cliffs of Deir el-Bersha. Its great painting scarred, but still legible. The water power still leaning forward, still pouring 4,000 years into his shift. The ramp at Hatnub still climbs out of the quarry pit, its post holes empty. Merer's papyrus lies flat under glass, the ink of a dead man's handwriting, still naming the horizon of Khufu. The lost river sleeps under 7 kilometers of sand, and 30 meters of sealed, confirmed, unexplored space hangs inside the Great Pyramid, above the Grand Gallery, exactly where the builders left it. The record keepers of Egypt wrote everything down. We have only just started reading. If you want to see what else the ancient world documented and dared us to decode, watch the next investigation on screen right now.